Good afternoon, everybody. Jim McCauley here. I'm your stand-in for the day. I'm Legislative Director for the League of Oregon Cities. Thanks for joining us this week. This is spring break week, so we might be a little bit short on our numbers, but nevertheless, we've got some important things to cover. Please make sure to keep your microphone muted unless you're specifically asked to unmute for Q&A. If you've not done so, please make sure you identify yourself by name and the city organization that you represent. Instructions for how to change your identifying information are located in the chat. This webinar is public space, open to all, and is being recorded. So keep that in mind with your comments and whatever you end up putting into chat. Questions from the attendees will be held at the end, effectively until LOC's lobbying team. Is there a little bit of an adjustment because we've got really two segments for today, and I'll explain that in a moment. We will end promptly at 1 o'clock, and you'll also be able to follow, of course, anything discussed here today with our legislative activities on the bulletin that comes out today and will be as part of our weekly communications program. So for today's legislative webinar, we've got two segments. The first segment will be Office of Emergency Management Director Matt Garrett and Mike Savara, who is the Chief's Programs Officer from OHCS. They're both going to be giving us an update on where things stand with implementing the governor's emergency orders related to housing and homelessness. And we're going to try to keep this first component of our discussion here, including the Q&A, to roughly 20 minutes. So once both of these presenters have had a chance to provide some information for us, we'll open it up to Q&A at that point. Once that's complete, we'll move on to the second segment, which is really going to be the government relations team, who will provide an update on the latest legislative work in the Capitol. For that segment, we will hold all questions until the end of those updates. For the legislative update today, we'll be covering housing and homelessness. We'll be covering House Bill 2513, which is a Measure 110 improvement, Senate Bill 850, which is public contracting. We're also going to have updates on economic development, broadband, as well as the semiconductor and some transportation related items here at the end. So with that, I'd like to welcome both OEM Director Matt Garrett and Mike Savara. I can't quite check and see if he's on the system yet, but we'll open it up to Matt because I can at least see him. And I'm not sure, Matt, if yourself or Mike would like to go first.
Well, Jim, thank you very much, and thank you to all on the screen and to LOC for this opportunity. So what I'd like to do is start things off, kind of give you just a basic legislative update. I mean, you're going to speak to some of the homelessness issues, but I think I'll lead with the signature of House Bill 5019. And then walk through some of the milestones as we have animated the activities associated with the emergency order, kind of where we are as of today. Today is a significant day, but as it'll play itself out through April, if all things fall into place, that's when monies will be allocated. So I'll give you those opportunities. So Jim, I see my friend Mike Savara on, so he's on, and again, as we get to maybe my final discussion in terms of where we stand with regard to the milestones and the reviews and the allocations of money, Mike may be able to dive a little deeper than I. And again, he's the smart guy on the housing and community service side of this equation. But the bottom line is, on Wednesday, Governor Kotek did indeed sign both House Bill 5019 and House Bill 2001. These were two legislative vehicles that really represented the early session investments in housing and homelessness. So included in House Bill 5019 was funding for the executive order response, mostly staffing opportunities for both agencies involved here. So that is obviously a significant jump off point. As we move down to give an overview of where we are in terms of the dynamics that are playing themselves out in the executive order regions, as well as the multi-agency coordinating groups that, again, are animating the various activities, the initiatives the community plans to ensure that the directions that they embed in these community plans do indeed meet the outcomes that are embedded in the executive order. And you'll remember there are three main thrusts. There's a statewide prevention investment to try to deal with roughly 8,700 folks, to prevent them from moving into unsheltered homelessness situations. There's the opportunity to add 600 shelter beds, and then in addition to that, to rapidly rehouse roughly 1,200 people. So those were the goals. Those are allocated throughout these executive order regions or community continuums of care that make up the areas and the targets of the executive order. As I said, those are fully engaged. They are all stood up. They've got their rosters. They're fully engaged. All these regions have received technical expertise and assistance from Housing and Community Services and some additional outside resources they have brought in to make sure we navigate through the complexities of this aggressive effort. And then finally, they are preparing and will be prepared to deploy their plans. Today is a red letter day, as I say, as those community plans are due in from the region. So by close of business today, we should have all the plans that articulate the courses of actions that and the various interventions they have identified to address those three goals that were embedded in the executive order. I think as we continue to move forward, I'll give you a couple other milestones or dates that'll play themselves out. So as we receive by close of business today, those plans, the professionals at Housing and Community Services, they will do a review of the plans to make sure that the initiatives and the interventions are certainly in alignment with securing those outcomes. They will endorse if all is good. They'll check the box on that by April 6th. Once that's endorsed, what we will do is there's been a lot of upfront work done at Housing and Community Services to ready agreements, grant agreements with the various grantees. I think we stand ready on the 6th, once everything is endorsed. Those grantees now on the 7th will be sent those agreements to review and for signature. So the expectation is they will vet. They've been given about a week, and on April 14th, those signed, executed agreements come back to Housing Community Services. And once that wire is tripped, then on April 26th, funds will be allocated to, again, animate the various initiatives and interventions that will make up the workload as we play this out through the end of the lifespan of the executive order, which again culminates January 10th of 2024. So a lot of work has been done. A lot of work is playing itself out now, with much to come as we jumpstart the activities through the rest of 2023 and at least into the first 10 days of January of 2024. So I think that really walks us through the major milestones that are in play right now. I would also say that there is a conversation about the balance of state. We'll have that, but I think first and foremost, we'll take care of the 7 regions, turn to the 8th region, which is the balance of the state, and walk through that conversation as well. We've also had some opportunities with 3 counties that initially weren't identified in the executive order, but met the criteria to opt in. And I think that's probably the second wave of engagement that the agencies will move forward on. And then finally, I think we have a forthcoming engagement with the cities, to be very honest with you, to engage in seeking your counsel and your insights on how we address the preventative monies that are going to the CAAs and moving forward on that front. So I think as we have the early investment, we also know that Governor Kotek has a greater housing and homelessness effort embedded in her recommended budget that'll navigate through the legislative session over the next coming months here. So a lot has happened this week in terms of checking or clearing some significant milestones that again have prepared us to move into the future. Mike, if I can ask for your expertise, maybe a little more detail in terms of the forthcoming engagement with cities that I think you and your professionals at Housing and Community Services may be engaged in as we speak to that funding that's heading to the CAAs.
Thank you so much, Director Garrett. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Mike Savara. I'm the Interim Chief Programs Officer with Oregon Housing Community Services. It's really great to be with you all today. I want to provide a little bit more detail on sort of the different buckets of funding Director Garrett was just articulating. So one of the three goals related to the emergency order response is around prevention. So the goal is to prevent 8,750 households from becoming homeless or losing their homes due to eviction. And we, through House Bill 5019, now that it is signed by the governor and it is the law, we have a total of $33.6 million that goes statewide, regardless of EO region or not, for those efforts. And the agency is going to be deploying those throughout the state through community action agencies primarily. There is some flexibility in being able to determine if a community action agency in particular may or may not have capacity to deliver that. So we're working on some specific regions of the state to ensure we're getting complete statewide coverage. Those resources, those allocations are actually already out to community action agencies. We issued the amounts that they were going to be receiving last week, and happy to provide those figures as well to this group. The rental assistance prevention funds are separate from what will be also in the 2023 biennium coming to the balance of state, specifically for shelter and rehousing efforts. So there's actually two different kind of buckets of resources that are going out throughout the balance of state. The balance of state resources will be available starting on July 1st for communities in the rural Oregon continuum of care, the 26 rural communities that are making up that balance of state. That's really where we want to dig in and understand more around what the local direction, the insights, the expertise that cities and counties and service providers might have for us to really understand how we can deploy those resources. Y'all probably know well at this point, but Oregon Housing Community Services really historically has deployed resources to community action agency partners statewide. We're really interested in listening to you all and in setting up some space here shortly to really understand insights that we can gather. I'm especially thinking about some of the amazing work that I know House Bill 4123 pilot communities are doing, standing up and responding to the needs around their communities and collaborating with local governments in ways that Oregon just has never really done before. I know I've gotten a chance to be involved in some of the conversations from the 4123 communities. I'm just so impressed by every one of them that's doing such great work to really redesign and think through what those communities look like. So we really want to hear from y'all. We want to hear what some of those insights are and how we can really think about the deployment of those resources in a strategic way to align with the governor's goals. So I think those are kind of big picture pieces I wanted to share. So we have not notified, I think Nikki asked this in the chat, great question. We have not notified the balance of state communities that they'll be receiving grants, in part because we really want to do this engagement. We want to understand some of the specific direction and advice that you all and cities have across the state to really ensure how we can deploy those in a way that makes a lot of sense for local communities. So I think those are the big pieces I wanted to cover. Happy to yield time to make sure we have, if there's any questions or comments.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you both. So I'm sorry, Matt.
No, Jim, I was just going to say, please, I think if we can take maybe the next several minutes here to take any questions. And then I would hope, my guess is there'll be additional questions, right? This is a very complex issue. I would hope you and your professionals at LOC would capture anything and then send it on to Director Bell and I to make sure we can respond appropriately to any additional questions we might not get to in the next couple minutes here.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that and appreciate the time from both of you this morning. So I'm going to take the first question really here in the chat. And this was really a reference to Josephine County coming from Mayor Bristol of Grants Pass. And effectively, there's you got Grants Pass and Cade Junction in Josephine County. Both have declared an emergency, but the county commissioners don't sound like they're on board with that type of an emergency. So do you have some suggestions?
No, yeah. My suggestion would be AOC and LOC get together and try to facilitate a conversation that really is a local issue. And the last thing we want to do is to jump into that. I've had the privilege of speaking with the city attorney of Grants Pass. He was very passionate and explained the tensions. Unfortunately, the construct that we have in the executive order had everything going through the counties, right, to opt in, to declare an emergency, and that triggered opportunities to opt in for those areas that weren't identified in the Executive Order 2302. So the reality is the vehicle that we have, unfortunately, I think, at least in the case of Josephine County, exacerbated a tension that already existed between certain cities in the county there. But Jim, I'll just be blunt. I just think if there is a pathway forward, it may come from you and your professionals, as well as the professionals at the Association of Counties, saying, how do we navigate these waters? I mean, the die is cast, so to speak, on where we are with the current process, but we do have legislative conversations that'll continue that may inform it. So I guess I certainly realize that. I understand the hard work that's taking place in Grants Pass, in Cave Junction. I think we have a similar situation in McMinnville, where there's a heck of a lot of work being done to address the humanitarian crisis that are playing themselves out in those communities here. We just don't have the vehicle that addresses the challenges specific to this, and unfortunately, I believe that may have existed for some time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. I know it's not a great outcome or path forward here, but something definitely I think we'll have to take a look at and see what we can do to help out with the conversation.
Jim, can I add just like a OHCS kind of funding component of this? So I want to make sure that Mayor Bristol is capturing this as well. So Josephine County is part of the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care. They have a community action agency, UCAN, that covers the region there. UCAN will be receiving funding for the prevention efforts that covers both their county regions, which is Josephine and Douglas counties. So those resources will be going out in the next month or so for them to do the prevention efforts. So definitely recommend connecting with UCAN staff, recognizing that there could be partnerships there to ensure that there's some continuity. The other component of this is that in July, that's when those shelter and rehousing efforts for funding will go out through House Bill 5019 from OHCS. And those efforts are really going to be going out through the balance of state. So in terms of funding resources, I can't speak to the emergency declaration like Director Garrett can, but the funding resources, regardless of an emergency declaration being adopted by Josephine County, would be available throughout the balance of state community for the shelter and rehousing efforts. We're likely to deploy those through a formula that would ensure sort of a geographic coverage across the swath of the rock. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful, but it is kind of wonky, disconnect between sort of the funding pathways that 5019 creates and the emergency declaration. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I appreciate the additional add-in on this. Nikki Messenger, I think you had your hand up, but you may have missed it.
Well, I don't have my camera on. I did. I wanted to just very quickly, hopefully, and I think he may have just answered this, but I was just going to mention hopefully continuing funding for the navigation centers that were part of the 2021 legislation, because it's critical that we keep those open. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? Again, you can drop it into chat or put your hand up.
Well, while the folks are thinking, I'll just add in really quick that in the governor's recommended budget, there is resources for continuing investments that we've made in shelter this biennium, and those include navigation centers and project turnkey projects. This is separate from the executive order work, but it is part of the governor's recommended budget. So pending legislative adoption of the entire GRB, those resources would be part of the plan. So wanted to mention that.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Well, I am sensing that you folks covered things pretty thoroughly, at least where updates are at this point in time. Obviously, we're going to continue to engage with everybody on this issue. It is a top priority for us, as I think everybody realizes. So it'll be important. Whoop, I think I got one more. Question was, can we use these funds for infrastructure directly tied to shelters?
Great question. Yeah, so the funding can be used to create new shelter beds, and that includes acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, and operations of those new shelter beds. So the infrastructure, I assume meaning sort of the capital construction and needs there. I know many folks are also doing alternative shelter models like pallet shelters and other types of pod shelter villages. Those would also be an eligible cost if they were setting up the sites. There's some specifics around what types of habitable structures we expect in the shelters that are being created, but definitely for setting up the cost to getting sewer and water, those would be eligible costs to get the building operational and habitable, because we require things like running water at the shelter facilities, so we want to make sure that those are possible to get there. So yes, definitely.
Okay. Awesome, thank you.
Jim, I think with that, I certainly want to respect your agenda, because I know you have much to speak about in terms of legislative activities. Michael, thank you. Savara, you had outstanding, hell of a lot better answers than I, to be very honest with you. Jim, I think the reality is we are all in this for the long game, right? We have mechanisms and vehicles in play right now, but this is a race that probably doesn't have a finish line, to be very honest with you. So continuing conversation, seeking counsel and insights from you and your professionals, that's something that will be extremely important, not only to the two agencies on the screen, but the other agencies that have fingerprints on addressing this, again, this humanitarian crisis. As I said, as your members continue to noodle on things or have any additional questions, if you could capture those and send them our way, we will do our very best to get responses back to you quickly.
Definitely. Again, appreciate the willingness for both of you to come on today and share some of your insights. And again, like I said, on the front of this and probably throughout, we'll stay engaged, and because this is not going to be a one and done conversation. This is something that is going to be extending well past session for sure.
Well said. Thank you, folks. Take care. Thank you for all you do at the cities. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the legislative update, really kind of the core of the work that your government relations team is involved with on a daily basis. So with that, I'm going to start out with Ariel Nelson, who will have some continued conversation here over some housing and homeless issues and stuff in front of us. So Ariel, if you're ready to go.
Jim, I apologize. My internet's cut out. I'm on the phone. Could you skip to someone else and I'll try and reconnect?
Yeah, not a problem. Scott, why don't you go ahead and start out with your pieces?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Scott Winkles, and I'm your lobbyist on all things human resources in the general government space. A couple of reports today. I'm going to start out with the good news. I would have reported this last week. We didn't have the call, but Senate Bill 850, which was the public contracting bill that was very troubling to the league. It would have required or severely limited the number contractors available to do work on public improvement projects. That bill did not make it out of, it is dead. It did not, it is no longer posted. It missed the deadlines. And so thank you to everybody who reached out to their senators and their legislators to help defeat that bill. So that was some very welcome news. House Bill 25, I'll switch on now to Measure 110 reform, which is something the League has been very active and interested in pursuing this session. There's been an ongoing work group to make recommendations along the resources, the funding side of Measure 110. If you recall, in 2022, when the funding, they're called the Burn Behavioral Health Resource grants, were scheduled to be allocated. It took the agency 7 months longer than they anticipated, missed deadlines. They failed to have a criteria, failed to have an open process. It was quite the mess going into 2022. Legislature's taken that up. We have House Bill 2513 and the -1 amendments. It does make certain improvements to the program, some of which were advocated for the League. A lot of those were around process to ensure that we had there was actually staff that was accountable for the program, that we were having an open process, that it was behaving like a public body in the state of Oregon is supposed to, and clarified what services would be funded or were eligible for funding under Measure 110. Unfortunately, the amendment does not include a key component of the LOC ask, which was representation. The Oregon Secretary of State's audit, when it conducted its review of the program, found that coordination between local governments and public safety was significantly lacking. The League proposed to remedy this by ensuring that we had representation on the Oversight and Accountability Commission. That was not included. I think the amendment on balance certainly is an improvement on what we had in 2022. That's not a particularly high bar, but it does correct some significant deficiencies. I don't think this is the last time this legislative session that we're going to have an opportunity to address this issue. I think we will see this bill either in the other chamber or in the Capital Construction Subcommittee of Ways and Means, which is sort of it's where the leadership of both chambers can resolve some of the thornier issues of a session moving forward. But that's the update for now on this measure. I think there's more to come.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on to Lindsay. She's got a couple of items within the economic development area.
Yeah, hi everyone. Lindsay Tennis, your revenue and economic development lobbyist. So all the items that I'm going to mention are also in the bulletin. Next week in House Revenue on Tuesday morning at 8:30, there's going to be two bills up that have to do with economic development. One is House Bill 2199, which extends the Standard Enterprise Zone program. And this same bill has been heard in House Economic Development previously and then was referred to Revenue, so it's getting heard again. So many of you have already submitted testimony and shown up to hearings on this bill and hearings on other enterprise zone related bills throughout session. So thank you for your continued advocacy. There are economic development bills kind of all over the place in committees right now. So we just want to make sure that we're continuing a strong showing for that hearing up on Tuesday morning. And then in the same committee hearing, they will hear House Bill 3011. And this bill, we've been talking about some of the proposed changes the legislature is looking at in terms of enterprise zones. And this bill also touches the SIP program, Strategic Investment Program. So I have a summary of those changes in the bulletin as well, but I will go over some of them. There's been a series of articles in the Oregonian, I think, that have inspired a lot of this conversation. But in terms of these economic development programs, they remove retail shipping warehouses from qualified businesses, also removes property with floor area ratio specific to the Portland metro region. And the intent there is to remove data centers in the Portland metro region from receiving these property tax exemptions through enterprise zones and SIP. The bill also adds criteria to the resolution that must be adopted by local governments. So local governments who sponsor these agreements in enterprise zones already have to adopt a resolution that has job requirements, but this adds, or I guess further spells out what has to be in that resolution, including infrastructure needs and financing and any other incentives or benefits that were offered to the business in the agreement. And the intent there is to add more transparency so that constituents know what is going in these agreements. And then there's a piece about adding some oversight from business organ to determine whether these business agreements will increase local infrastructure stress. I think the concern there is that the business activities that generate from the enterprise zone cause an infrastructure stress on, areas outside of the enterprise zone, and that's not accounted for. Again, this is, I think there's some cherry-picked situations that this legislation is coming from. And then a big change that would come from this bill would be cutting the length of the rural enterprise zone property tax exemption from between 7 to 15 years down to 8 years, with an option to renew for additional 2 years at a 50% exemption. And the bill also cuts the strategic investment program exemption from 15 years to 8 years. So a lot of changes in this bill. I think it's also fair to say that it's concerning that enterprise zones and SIP are being rolled into the same bill because they're very different programs and deserve separate conversations. And I'm still collecting feedback from LOC members ahead of Tuesday morning's hearing. So please send me any feedback you have. I'm also convening a meeting Monday morning with some, economic development, city manager type staff position. So if you want to be in that meeting, please let me know. We're just going to be talking about all of the proposed changes that are coming up in this bill, and just to make sure that I have, the best possible information from all of you going into Tuesday's hearing. And if you can, please participate in Tuesday's hearing, submit testimony. And I think there's just a lack of awareness of how these programs really work. And, I think there can be an unfortunate perception that local governments are being taken advantage of by businesses and enterprise zones. So, any messaging you can provide to combat that narrative would be great. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lindsay. And one other piece I want to reiterate. We've had we've got some great stories out there on this subject in terms of e-zones and the value that it presents to communities. So those of you who've got some local papers in your community or in your region, I know Lindsay has sent out a recent request and stuff that you start providing some of that input publicly, especially for an op-ed for those papers, and let us know if you need any assistance with some of the narratives on that subject matter. So with that, I'm going to transition back to Ariel Nelson, who I think has got a better connection, so she can walk us through some additional updates on housing and homelessness. So with that, Ariel.
Thanks, Jim. I'm still on the phone. Apologies, everyone. For some reason, my internet is not cooperating today, but hopefully folks can hear me on the phone.
You're good.
Great, thank you so much. So there are a number of housing related bills that LOC is watching closely as we near a very important legislative deadline. Tuesday, April 4th is the last day for bills to move out of policy committee in their chamber of origin, meaning if it's a Senate bill and it was introduced in the Senate, it's got to move out of the policy committee, be voted forward to remain alive for the session. There are exceptions for the revenue committees, rules committees, and any joint committees, but for the housing bills in either the housing committees or there's some in the agriculture, land use, and water committee in the House, they've got to move out on the 4th. So we're looking at some really packed agendas in these committees, and we have some hints and some understanding of what we think may be moving forward. We anticipate that a number of bills may be moved to the rules committee to preserve longer conversations on policy details. There's a fuller list of bills in today's bulletin, but I want to focus in the interest of time on two main bills that we're sending an action alert out on shortly after this meeting. So I wanted folks to know that, look for that in your inboxes. It will be going out to all the city CEO list, so all city managers, recorders, administrators, as well as mayors. And if you don't receive it and want to, please contact me. But you can also get that bill information in your bulletin article in your inbox. So the first action alert I wanted to share is for -5 amendments to Senate Bill 847. Senate Bill 847 is a very large, we're calling it the omnibus housing bill, because there are a number of housing and shelter and development related concepts in there. There are -5 amendments that we are asking cities to urge support for. This is the rural liability protection for safe rest sites that has been brought to us from Roseburg City Councilor Ellen Porter. She was on the last call that we met and shared this concept. The -5 amendments to Senate Bill 847 limit liability for rural communities that designate safe resting places or campgrounds for unhoused residents. And those campsites have to provide a number of things, mainly reliable access to a space of a certain size for their tents or to park a vehicle, keep their belongings. The campsites or safe resting sites have to be away from hazardous areas, sensitive environmental lands, and they have to be providing some basic amenities like safe drinking water, sanitation facilities, waste management services. So the bill had a public hearing last week, and thanks again to Councilor Porter. There was a really robust lineup of testimony from cities, from counties, from homeless service providers and shelter providers about the need for this bill. This was a concept that didn't really have a strong chance of moving forward. And again, thanks to Councilor Porter's efforts and the folks who testified and submitted letters on the record, this concept has seen new life, but we need your help to get it across the finish line. We are asking cities to email directly. The record has closed. So we're asking you to email the Senate Housing and Development Committee, and there's a link to that committee and their emails is in your bulletin and in that action alert that's coming to you. And the talking points and a link to the LOC one-pager are in that message in your bulletin, but urge their support to pass the -5 amendments with Senate Bill 847. And that's up, that hearing for that vote is scheduled first thing Monday morning. So we need those emails to go out today, tonight, over the weekend to those legislators. We also encourage you to directly contact your local senators, representatives. They're not able to vote if they're not on the committee this Monday, but this will help raise awareness for this concept in general. So that's the first action alert. The second action alert, I'm going to be honest, is a little bit complicated. House Bill 3414 is the governor's housing bill. Governor Kotek introduced House Bill 3414 at the end of February to support her housing production goals of developing 36,000 new homes per year and increased housing access and housing affordability. We want to be really clear that cities strongly support these goals, and the LOC and member cities remain committed partners for this work. Unfortunately, HB 3414, and there are also -1 amendments posted, conflict and contradict with adopted state housing production priorities. The bill will remove important local tools to meet new state requirements and adds new layers of bureaucracy that will prevent already limited city resources and stretch thin city staff from focusing on encouraging and improving housing development applications and meeting our housing targets. So this is action alert is in your inbox. We are asking cities to similarly contact the key committee. In this case is the House Housing and Homelessness Committee. This bill is scheduled for a vote on Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. So you've got to get your emails and outreach over the weekend or on Monday before Tuesday. We also encourage you to contact your local legislators so they have awareness of this bill. Urge them to provide more time for stakeholders to inform necessary amendments to the bill. The message to Governor Kotek and the legislature is to please partner with cities to improve the bill rather than forcing local implementation partners, yourselves, to spend effort, time, staff, implementing new bureaucratic measures that won't solve the problem. So there's additional details about what the bill does, what the difficulty is, the parts of the bill that we would like to support and strengthen. That's in your inbox in the bulletin, and it's coming to you in the action alert. And please do feel free to reach out with any questions, or I'm happy to take them at the end of the call.
Great. Thanks very much, Ariel. One thing I definitely like to stress, anytime we get these action alerts that are going out the door, we have to make sure that we get our membership involved, and you guys have been great throughout this whole session. I think the grassroots involvement and response to these action alerts and our weekly needs have been incredibly helpful, moving things through the process and trying to create some success stories. It is being mentioned on the floor of the House for sure during some of the voting processes, and we certainly hear about it when we are meeting with individuals. So there's nothing like continuing on with making sure your voices are heard, because we have to continue to reinforce the messages that we're providing in the Capitol with the folks who are at the local level, such as yourself. So let me move next in our sequence to Nolan Plesha, who's got, I think, some positive news on broadband.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And just wanted to really give everybody a quick update on House Bill 3201A. This is the big broadband bill that we're pushing this session to really provide more flexibility for the Oregon Broadband Fund to really allow us to capture the different federal funding sources that are coming, so we can really maximize the amount of funds that we receive and to make sure we're in alignment with federal guidance. It passed out of the House floor yesterday with a strong bipartisan vote of 43 to 15 vote. 2 folks were absent. That would have also added 2 additional yes votes. And I just really wanted to take this opportunity to echo everything Jim just said, to thank our members for sending in their logos to be added to the one pager. That was actually flagged on the floor by a couple different representatives as recognizing their cities were on that one pager. So that is incredibly helpful, and thank you all for doing so. And for those of you who have not had the opportunity to vet that and send us your logos, if you would like to, this will be now moving to the Senate. So please feel free to send me your logo. I'll make sure my email's in the chat. I will add it onto the one pager and make sure it's there for the Senate side. And also just again, want to give another shout out to members who were able to contact their representatives on the House side and encourage them to support the bill, both in committee and for the floor. Again, I heard from numerous legislators that they received calls or emails from you all, and that really impacted their votes. So again, just really echoing that you all have been doing a great job of helping to support our work in committees and on the floors. And that is very much appreciated by myself as well as the other members of this team. So stay tuned. This bill now heads to the Senate. We will definitely be reaching out to you all as it moves through that side. And we'll be updating our talking points as we move forward so that they're in line with where the bill is at. Again, just thank you everyone for the support that you've provided for us on this bill, and hopefully we'll get to see this over the finish line.
Thanks very much, Nolan, and good news. We're getting to the point now, session-wise, where some of our bills that a lot of us are putting our time and energy into our portfolios are starting to hit some of the chambers for votes. And hopefully we'll have more positive stories here over the next coming weeks. So to finish things out for at least the legislative component before we move on to basically some Q&A at the end, is really a couple of pieces for me. One is the semiconductor package, that's Senate Bill 4, that moved off the Senate floor earlier this week. Pretty good vote count, 21-8. It's now going to be sitting in Ways and Means. This is one of those situations, I'll say, on a vote count that the opposition isn't necessarily opposed to what Senate Bill 4 is doing. I think what some of the no votes eventually mean for this is they wanted to see a more bold package or more money put into this potential once-in-a-lifetime funding mechanism coming from the federal government. So the other piece is House Bill 2095. It is on the floor, or it's on essentially the third reading calendar for Monday. That is photo radar for us. This is something that we have been after for the last 4 sessions. The window finally created an opening, and it moved out of committee with just 1 vote in opposition. So I'm feeling actually pretty good about this moving forward, but it never hurts to contact your legislators. Essentially, 2095 does a couple of things. One is it extends the authority for use of mobile radar and fixed photo radar to every city in the state. Currently, there's only 10 cities that have access to mobile radar, and only 1 city that has access to fixed photo radar. So we're extending that authority statewide. The other part is for those cities who have been making adjustments to speed on their streets. We just recently got that authority. It's done in 5-mile-per-hour increments. We've been able to extend it to up to 10-mile-per-hour increments because some of the streets that are out there in communities are well beyond what we would consider, or the communities consider, to be safe as well. So that's helpful, certainly going forward. I think the final piece on this, and this really comes down to the application of how photo radar is used. Right now, you can only use it in high crash corridors, which from us, I think the whole idea is to not create a high crash corridor. So you're going to be able to use this essentially in a more extended range of streets. High speed corridors essentially is the new standard that's out there. So that's all good, I think, and it's definitely going to go forward, but would certainly appreciate anybody reaching out to your local state elected officials on the House side to support 2095 going forward. The final piece here to bring up is interstate bridge funding. So they've been after a funding package, we'll say, for interstate bridge for quite some time. Essentially where the issue is going to end up before May 1st is, I'll say, a policy bill. There is not going to be a revenue package that goes along with it. There's not enough time at this stage of our session to be able to get a dedicated amount of revenue physically in the bill. So the piece of legislation that's going to advance essentially comes to a promissory note or a commitment from the state of Oregon to provide $1 billion towards interstate bridge. Washington already has made that commitment. We need to follow suit. The importance of this bill is that it needs to be through both chambers and have a signature from the governor by May 1st. The reason being is that that's a critical date for being able to apply for additional federal funds. And if we miss that date, Oregon will miss out on being in the queue for federal funding. So you're going to learn a little bit more about these details coming forward. And this also is in the bulletin, like virtually everything else that we're talking about here today, for some of those details. So I think with that, I think the best time now over the next 10 minutes is to take some questions from folks. Again, feel free to raise your hand, put a question in the chat. And for all of the government affairs team, make sure you put your contact information in chat so folks know how to get a hold of you. The first question I have actually that's in chat is from Don Russ from Glendale. And the question is related to homeless. So the question is are we supposed to have, or they're looking at basically developing an ordinance in place by July 1 to address homelessness, and that they have a unique city in terms of Glendale. So they were asking for some assistance in getting a hold of some guidance. So I don't know, Ariel, if you can help out with that one. Ariel?
Sorry, Jim, I missed that. What would you,
Yeah.
what were you asking for? I
Yeah,
apologize.
so there's a question in here from the city of Glendale, Don Russ. They're in the process of putting together an ordinance. I think the idea here is they need to get it done by July 1st for addressing homelessness, and they're looking for some guidance. So is that basically you?
Yes. Sorry, I can't see, I don't have access to the earlier chat due to my connection issues. Apologies. So the LOC developed, thanks to the help of a group of city attorneys, a legal guidance on implementing House Bill 3115, which relates to those local ordinance requirements for camping ordinances, as well as covers relevant federal case law and other related legislation. That legal guidance is available on the LOC website. Under the resources tab, there's a homeless solutions site that you can get to for an LOC page. And that resource is online, and it was updated as recently as, I believe, September, based on some more recent federal case law developments. You can also feel free to reach out to me, Ariel Nelson at anelson@orcities.org. I'll put my email in the chat, and I'm also happy to connect you with our legal team at LOC.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Paul Schaefer.
Yeah, this is a question for Ariel. Based on the hearing last week, are there specific items that we ought to be noting when we send comments regarding Amendment 5 for 847? And then on that same topic, there was a standalone House bill that was essentially Amendment 5. What's become of that? Is it going anywhere? Is it dead? Has it been moved into something, or what's going on there? Thank you.
Great questions. For your outreach and advocacy on the -5 amendments, the general talking points about what the bill does and the need for the bill or the concepts are in your bulletin and in the action alert that's going out. But it would also help, if you have specific plans or provider partners or examples from your city about what the need is and how you would use this or what the barrier has been. Those are always very helpful to sprinkle into your communications, to bring it back to what this means for your city.
Okay.
The House bill, there was a House bill that was introduced separately, and it was unfortunately introduced very late in the session, and that bill is no longer alive. It is dead. So the -5s are really our current vehicle, current path for this concept. If they don't move forward as part of Senate Bill 847 on Monday, we still have options to amend this concept into other bills that are still viable, right? But this is our current target. So that's why we're really asking folks to reach out and really put out full support to those -5 amendments.
Great, thanks very much. So more questions, again, chat or feel free to raise your hand.
I see, Tim, I see a chat. Where do we send comments for the -5 amendments? I would really encourage folks to read your LOC bulletin. And again, the action alert that's going out, there will be a link to the email addresses for the senators on the Senate Housing and Development Committee. That's where we want you to send those. You can also send comments, but it won't be as meaningful for Monday. To your local delegation, your local state senator and representative.
Right. Thanks for the catch. Just a quick time check, folks. We got about 6 minutes left before we step away from this week's call. So still plenty of time to ask some questions. All right. Well, we must have filled everybody's information that they needed for the day, so that's good. Again, your main point of communication for us on a weekly basis will be certainly the bulletin. I think it actually just was sent out here a short time ago. You'll have all of the details for everything that was discussed today, so stay in tune with that. Any questions that you may have for your government affairs team, certainly got the information within chat, and you can get that off to the website as well. But definitely appreciate everybody joining us this week. Next week's a couple of big days for us for sure in terms of session, because some bills, if they don't end up moving into a work session, then we'll be done with them hopefully for the session for many committees. So we've got some other milestones coming up over April and things of that nature where other bills will drop off the system. So again, appreciate the joining us here on a Friday, and we will see you next Friday. Thank you, everybody.